9 years of silence, one night of revenge. The jury foreperson stood up, cleared her throat and read the words that would determine whether Rachel Morrison would spend the rest of her life in prison or walk out of that courtroom a free woman. In the case of the state versus Rachel Elizabeth Morrison, on the charge of first-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant. Rachel gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles white, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs. Behind her, she could hear her mother sobbing quietly. To her right, her attorney placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Across the aisle, the prosecutor sat with his arms crossed, confident in his case. And in the back row, barely visible but impossible to ignore, sat her Uncle David's widow and children, staring at Rachel with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. The foreperson continued, "Not guilty." The courtroom exploded. Rachel collapsed forward, her head on the table, her entire body shaking with sobs she had been holding back for weeks. Her mother screamed with relief. The prosecutor threw his papers down in disgust, and David's widow stormed out, shouting that justice had died in that courtroom. But to understand how we got here, to understand why a 25-year-old woman walked into her uncle's bedroom on a cold February night in 2024 and shot him 3 times while he slept, we need to go back 9 years. Back to when Rachel Morrison was just 16 years old and believed that the man everyone called Uncle David was someone she could trust. This is the only witness. And this is the story of 9 years of abuse, a lifetime of silence, and one moment when a survivor decided that surviving wasn't enough anymore. Maplewood, Oregon. Population 11,000. The kind of small Pacific Northwest town where rain falls more days than it doesn't, where everyone knows your business before you do, where families have lived in the same houses for generations. It's beautiful in the way that small towns in movies are beautiful. All covered bridges and farmers markets and high school football games that the whole town turns out for. The Morrison family had been in Maplewood since the 1950s. Rachel's grandfather had opened Morrison Hardware on Main Street, and her father, Thomas Morrison, had taken it over in the 90s. Rachel's mother, Diana, worked as a librarian at the elementary school. They lived in a modest blue house with white shutters on Elm Street, the kind of house where the lawn was always mowed and the porch always had flowers in the summer. Rachel was their only child. She was born in 1998, a quiet girl who loved reading, who spent more time in her mother's library than anywhere else, who dreamed of going to college and studying literature. She was small for her age, shy, the kind of kid who faded into the background at school, but came alive when she was writing in her journal or lost in a book. David Morrison was Thomas's younger brother, 42 years old when Rachel turned 16. He had never married, lived alone in a small apartment above the old movie theater downtown, worked odd jobs, construction work, landscaping, whatever he could find. Money was always tight for David. He borrowed from Thomas frequently, always promising to pay it back, rarely doing so. But he was family, and Thomas never said no. David was around a lot. Sunday dinners at the Morrison house, holidays, birthdays. He was the fun uncle, the one who brought Rachel books he found at garage sales, who helped her with her homework when she struggled with math, who told jokes that made her laugh. Thomas and Diana trusted him completely. He was Thomas's brother. He was family. What reason did they have not to trust him? Rachel was 16 when it started. It was a Tuesday afternoon in September 2014. Her parents were at the store doing inventory, a task that always took hours. Rachel was home alone, doing homework at the kitchen table, when she heard a knock at the door. It was Uncle David. He said he had borrowed some tools from Thomas and wanted to return them. Rachel let him in, pointed to the garage, went back to her homework. But David didn't go to the garage. He came into the kitchen, sat down across from Rachel, asked how school was going. She told him fine. He asked if she had a boyfriend yet. She said no, feeling suddenly uncomfortable with the question. He smiled, said that was probably for the best, that boys her age were immature, that she was too smart for them anyway. Then he reached across the table and touched her hand. Just a touch. Nothing overtly wrong, but something about it made Rachel's stomach turn. She pulled her hand back, made an excuse about needing to finish her homework. David stood up, said he should probably get going, but before he left, he leaned down and whispered in her ear, "You're growing up so fast, Rachel. You're beautiful. I bet you don't even know how beautiful you are." Then he left, and Rachel sat at that kitchen table, her heart pounding, her skin crawling, knowing something was wrong, but not having the words to explain what. If you're following this story and need to hear more cases where survivors fought back against their abusers, don't forget to subscribe to The Only Witness. We tell the stories of courage, survival, and the impossible choices trauma forces people to make. It didn't happen all at once. That's not how these things work. Predators don't attack. They groom, they test boundaries, they slowly escalate, always watching to see if their victim will tell, always ready with an excuse if they get caught. Over the next few months, David started showing up at the house more often, always when Rachel was home alone, always with an excuse, returning something, picking something up, checking to see if Thomas was around. He would linger. He would sit too close. He would find reasons to touch her shoulder, her arm, her hair. He would tell her she was special, that she was mature for her age, that he could talk to her in ways he couldn't talk to anyone else. Rachel felt uncomfortable, but she didn't know what to do. David was her uncle. He was family. Her parents trusted him. If she said something, would they even believe her? And what would she say exactly? That he looked at her weird? That he made her uncomfortable? That wasn't a crime. That wasn't abuse. That was just something she couldn't name. Then, 3 days before Christmas 2014, it escalated. Rachel was in her bedroom wrapping presents when David showed up. He said he had a gift for her, something special. He came upstairs, closed the door behind him, and sat on her bed. The gift was a necklace, delicate and silver, the kind of thing a boyfriend would give, not an uncle. He told her to try it on. She did, her hands shaking. He stood behind her, fastened the clasp, let his hands linger on her shoulders. Then he turned her around to face him and kissed her. Not on the cheek, on the mouth. His hands gripping her arms, his body pressing against hers, his breath hot and wrong and terrifying. Rachel froze. Her brain couldn't process what was happening. This was her uncle. This wasn't supposed to happen. When he finally pulled away, he smiled, told her she was incredible, told her this was their secret, that if she told anyone it would destroy the family, that her father would never forgive her for causing problems, that no one would believe her anyway. Then he left, and Rachel sat on her bed, that necklace around her neck feeling like a noose, and cried until she couldn't breathe. She didn't tell anyone. She was 16. She was scared. She was ashamed. And David had planted the seeds of doubt that every predator plants. No one will believe you. You'll be blamed. You'll destroy the family. This is your fault. So she stayed silent. Over the next 9 years, the abuse continued and escalated. David would come to the house when Rachel was alone. He would corner her in the hallway, in her bedroom, in the garage. He would touch her, kiss her, and eventually, he did more. He raped her for the first time when she was 17 in her own bed, while her parents were at a church function. She was 18 when it happened the second time, 19 when she lost count. Rachel tried to avoid him. She stayed late at school. She got a part-time job at the library. She made excuses to not be home when she knew he might show up. But Maplewood was small, and David always found her. And when he did, he would remind her of the same things. This is our secret. No one will believe you. You'll destroy the family. Rachel's grades dropped. She stopped applying to colleges. She stopped writing. She stopped reading. She became a ghost of herself, going through the motions of life but not really living. Her parents noticed something was wrong, but when they asked, Rachel said she was fine. Depressed, maybe. Stressed about the future. Nothing specific. Nothing that would make them suspect what was really happening. At 19, Rachel tried to kill herself. She took a bottle of her mother's sleeping pills and went to bed hoping she wouldn't wake up, but her mother found her in time. Rachel spent 3 days in the hospital, then 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility. When the therapists asked why she had tried to end her life, Rachel said she didn't know. She was just sad, just tired. She couldn't explain the real reason, because the real reason had been hammering into her head for 3 years. Don't tell. No one will believe you. This is your fault. So she didn't tell. and the abuse continued. Rachel turned 20, then 21, then 22. She worked at the library, lived at home because she couldn't afford to move out, spent her days in a fog of depression and trauma. She saw David at family dinners, at holidays, at birthdays. She watched him laugh and joke with her parents, watched them trust him, watched them have no idea what he had been doing to their daughter for years. And the worst part, David acted like nothing was wrong. He acted like they had some kind of relationship, like what was happening between them was consensual, like Rachel wanted this. He would wink at her across the dinner table. He would brush past her in the hallway, his hand lingering on her waist. He would text her late at night, telling her he missed her, that he was thinking about her, that they should spend time together. Rachel wanted to scream. She wanted to tell someone, anyone. But the years of silence had built a wall she didn't know how to break through. Then something changed. Rachel was 24 when she met Sarah Chen at the library. Sarah was a survivor advocate, in town to speak at the community center about sexual assault awareness. They started talking, and for the first time in her life, Rachel heard someone describe the exact dynamics she had been living with. Grooming, manipulation, coercion, shame, silence. Sarah gave Rachel her card, told her that if she ever needed to talk, she could call. Rachel held onto that card for 3 months before she finally called, and when she did, she told Sarah everything, every detail of the last 9 years, every assault, every threat, every moment of shame and fear and confusion. Sarah believed her. Sarah didn't question her. Sarah didn't ask why she hadn't said anything sooner. Sarah just listened, validated, and told Rachel that none of this was her fault. For the first time in 9 years, Rachel felt like maybe, just maybe, she could tell someone else. Before we continue, hit subscribe to The Only Witness, because some truths are too dark to stay buried. We tell the stories that demand justice and show why survivors deserve to be believed. Rachel decided to go to the police. Sarah went with her. On January 12, 2024, Rachel walked into the Maplewood Police Department and filed a report against her uncle David. She told Detective Karen Walsh everything: the grooming, the assaults, the threats, the 9 years of abuse. Detective Walsh took the report seriously. She interviewed Rachel for hours, documenting every detail. But then came the hard truth. Prosecuting a case like this would be nearly impossible. The abuse had happened over years, most of it without witnesses. There was no physical evidence left, no rape kit from 9 years ago, no text messages from the early years. David could claim it was all consensual, that Rachel was an adult now and had participated willingly, that she was lying for attention or money. The district attorney reviewed the case and declined to prosecute. They told Rachel that without more evidence, without corroboration, they couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the abuse had happened. They believed her, they said, but believing her wasn't enough for a criminal conviction. Rachel was devastated. She had finally found the courage to speak up, and the system had failed her. David would face no consequences. He would continue to be part of the family. He would continue to walk free while Rachel carried the weight of what he had done to her. So Rachel made a decision. If the legal system wouldn't give her justice, she would take it herself. On the night of February 8, 2024, Rachel waited until her parents were asleep. She went to her father's gun safe, a safe she had known the combination to since she was a teenager, because her father had taught her gun safety when she was young. She took his 9mm handgun, loaded it, and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she drove to David's apartment. She knew he would be home. She knew he would let her in because he always did. She knocked on his door at 11 p.m. David opened it with a smile, surprised but pleased to see her. He asked what she was doing there so late. She said she needed to talk. He let her in. He closed the door. He asked if she wanted something to drink. She said no. He sat on the couch, patted the cushion next to him, that same gesture he had been making for 9 years, the one that made Rachel's skin crawl. But this time, Rachel didn't sit. She stood in front of him, pulled the gun from her jacket, and pointed it at his chest. David's smile faded. He asked what she was doing. She told him she was ending this. He laughed, said she wouldn't actually shoot him, that she didn't have it in her. He stood up, started walking toward her, reaching for the gun. Rachel fired, once, twice, 3 times. David fell backward onto the couch, blood spreading across his chest. He looked up at her, confusion and shock in his eyes, and said one word. "Why?" Rachel looked at the man who had destroyed her life for 9 years and said, "Because you never stopped." Then she called 911. When police arrived, they found Rachel sitting on the floor, the gun beside her, David dead on the couch. She didn't resist arrest. She didn't try to run. She told them exactly what she had done and why she had done it. She was charged with first-degree murder. The case became a media sensation. On one side were those who saw Rachel as a victim who had been failed by the system and forced to take justice into her own hands. On the other side were those who saw her as a cold-blooded murderer who had killed an unarmed man in his own home. Rachel's defense attorney argued self-defense and what's called battered woman syndrome, a psychological condition where prolonged abuse causes a person to believe they are in constant danger and that violence is the only way to escape. The prosecution argued premeditation, that Rachel had planned the murder, that she had gone to David's apartment with the intent to kill, and that no amount of past abuse justified taking a life. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Rachel took the stand and described in excruciating detail 9 years of sexual abuse. She described the grooming, the manipulation, the assaults, the threats. She described going to the police and being told they couldn't help her. She described the moment she realized that if she didn't do something, David would continue to abuse her for the rest of her life. The prosecution cross-examined her aggressively, asking why she had waited so long to report, why she hadn't moved away, why she had continued to see David at family functions if the abuse was so terrible. These are the questions survivors always face, questions that reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of how trauma works, how fear works, how power and control work. Rachel's mother testified, sobbing on the stand, saying she had no idea what David had been doing, that if she had known she would have killed him herself. Rachel's father testified that he felt he had failed his daughter, that he should have seen the signs, that he would never forgive himself for trusting his brother. Sarah Chen, the survivor advocate, testified about the dynamics of long-term abuse, about why victims stay silent, about why the legal system so often fails survivors. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of prolonged sexual trauma and how it can lead to desperate acts of self-preservation. The jury deliberated for 4 days, and then they came back with their verdict: not guilty. Rachel Morrison walked out of that courtroom a free woman. But freedom, she would later say, was not the same as healing. If you're new here, subscribe to The Only Witness. We tell real stories that still echo through time, stories that force us to confront the impossible choices trauma creates and the failures of systems meant to protect us. The verdict sparked intense debate. Some celebrated it as justice for survivors, a recognition that sometimes the only way to escape an abuser is through violence. Others condemned it as vigilante justice, arguing that Rachel had committed murder and gotten away with it because of sympathy. Legal experts pointed out that the case highlighted a fundamental flaw in how the justice system handles long-term abuse. When abuse happens over years, evidence disappears, memories fade, the burden of proof becomes insurmountable, and survivors are left with no recourse, no protection, no justice. David Morrison's family never forgave Rachel. His widow, his children, his siblings all believed that he had been murdered in cold blood, that Rachel's accusations were lies designed to justify her actions. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Rachel, seeking damages for David's death. The case is still pending. Rachel's relationship with her parents was forever changed. Her mother stood by her, believed her, supported her through the trial, but her father struggled. He felt guilt for not protecting Rachel, anger at his brother for what he had done, and a deep, unshakable sadness that his family had been destroyed. He and Rachel are still working on rebuilding their relationship, but some wounds take years to heal. Rachel herself has spent the past year in intensive therapy, working through the trauma of the abuse and the trauma of taking a life. She has said in interviews that she doesn't regret pulling the trigger, that she would do it again if faced with the same situation. but that she wishes it had never come to that. She wishes someone had believed her sooner. She wishes the system had protected her. She wishes her uncle had just stopped, but he didn't stop, and so she stopped him. Today, Rachel Morrison is 26 years old. She still lives in Maplewood, though she's looking to move somewhere new, somewhere without the memories. She volunteers with Sarah Chen's survivor advocacy organization, speaking to other survivors, sharing her story, encouraging them to speak up, even when it feels impossible. She has become a controversial figure in the true crime community, a symbol of both survivor resilience and the failures of the justice system. Some see her as a hero. Others see her as a murderer who got away with it. Rachel says she doesn't care what people think. She survived, and that's what matters. The case has sparked important conversations about how we handle long-term abuse, about why survivors stay silent, about the limitations of the legal system, and about what justice really means. Can justice be found in a courtroom, or does it sometimes require taking matters into your own hands? There are no easy answers. Rachel's story is messy, complicated, and uncomfortable. It forces us to confront questions we'd rather not think about. What would you do if the system failed you? How long would you endure before you fought back? And when survival requires violence, who is really the victim and who is the perpetrator? Before we close, we want to hear from you. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else in the world? We love knowing that our community spans across continents, united by the demand for truth and justice. And tell us, do you think Rachel Morrison was justified in killing her uncle? Was it self-defense or murder? Drop your location and your thoughts in the comments. Sexual abuse that lasts for years doesn't just damage the body. It rewires the brain. It changes how you see the world, how you trust people, how you define safety. Survivors of long-term abuse often describe feeling trapped, like there's no way out, like speaking up will only make things worse. And when the legal system fails them, when they report their abuse and nothing happens, that feeling of helplessness becomes unbearable. Rachel Morrison lived with that unbearable weight for 9 years. She tried to survive quietly. She tried to endure. She tried to speak up. And when none of that worked, she made a choice that would change her life forever. Was it the right choice? That's not for me to say, but it was the only choice Rachel felt she had left. This is the story of Rachel Morrison, the young woman who was 16 when her uncle started abusing her and 25 when she ended it. This is the story of 9 years of silence, a lifetime of trauma, and one moment when a survivor decided that surviving meant fighting back. And this is the story of a jury that looked at all the evidence, heard all the testimony, and decided that sometimes justice looks different than we expect. Subscribe to The Only Witness for more real crime stories that refuse to fade, stories that challenge us to think about justice, accountability, and what we owe to survivors. Stories that remind us that the world is not black and white, that sometimes there are no good choices, only impossible ones, and stories that force us to ask ourselves what we would do if we were in Rachel's shoes. Real stories, real pain, real justice. This is The Only Witness.